Okay, so because I'm a nerd, I've got some book reports for my summer reading that I wanted to share. So I had way less time than I thought I would because I had less camping trips and just the summer was far busier than I could have anticipated. And thankfully, we had a lot of car trips, long distance driving, and so I was able to at least do some audiobooks to help me get a little further. And that was kind of my honestly my only saving grace. Otherwise, I maybe would have finished one book this entire summer. Um, I've never really given audiobooks the time of day, but after this and realizing just how much more accessible it is for me and my life, I'll probably find a way to start incorporating them into my routine. Um, I could actually get through the massive backlog of books that I've been wanting to read for years and years and years if I did that. I will always still love like physical books more and prefer those, but like realistically, given the time constraints of my life, like I can't really turn away. So I'm gonna have to find a way to like include those. Anyways, this is a follow up to the post I did right before summer started on the books I wanted to read. And as a reminder, those books were Filterworld by Chayka. I'm not really sure. Goblin Emperor by Katherine Addison. Wild and Distant Seas by Tara Karr Roberts. The Librarianist by Patrick deWitt. And A Time to Kill by John Grisham, his very first novel. Of these, the only one that I didn't finish was Wild and Distant Seas, and I'm making my way through it, and I'm going to continue reading it. But we're going to talk about each of these in my little book reports. The first one we're going to talk about is Filterworld. So with this book, the kind of like whole idea behind the research project that led to this book was that the author noticed that coffee shops all seem to consistently look the same all over the world, and he wanted to understand why. And so the answer to this was that it all came down to algorithms, and that these algorithms shape the choices that we make in numerous different ways, and that these algorithms are actually homogenizing our lives. But the book specifically focused on like culture. And so he talked about how algorithms are making choices for us that kind of result in what he described as like a flattened culture. Which I think there could have been a better allegory for this. I don't like the idea of flattened, the words, the flattened culture. I have a hard time like picturing it as what the author is trying to say it is. So, but one of the quote that I pulled here says, "The culture of Filterworld is the culture of presets, the established pattern that gets repeated again and again." End quote. And so he's talking about how other algorithms are making choices for us, which results, like I said, in this flattened culture. And there's kind of a handful of like central ideas throughout the entire book. There's like algorithmic control, so our exposure to culture, from like music to restaurants, movies that we go and see, what is even shown in theaters, is increasingly just totally controlled by algorithms that recommend certain content based on past behavior. So it's all based on historical data, right? And it creates this kind of filter where users are exposed to what they already like, stifles discovery, as well as stifling diversity. And I think if we look at our streaming services, I think there's no easier example to point to of this than what our streaming services do, whether it's our music ones or our TV and movie streaming services. Like they're all completely 100% dictated by algorithms at this point. And even searching for podcasts is really, really hard to burst or to break away from the algorithm and actually find things that are totally new and unrelated to anything that you've already said before. There's also the second big theme is kind of like this homogenization of culture. And so algorithms favor content that is popular and easily consumable, right? So this is pretty easy to, again, another kind of easy point to see where originality and like art, I guess, as maybe a way to frame this, originality and art are kind of like sidelined in favor of the safe bet. What's going to bring more clicks and what's going to bring more engagement. And a lot of this wrapped back into the third theme, which is like loss of agency. And so as these algorithms become more sophisticated, they become more relied on, and unfortunately they also make more accurate predictions. I'm saying unfortunately because it does contribute to this issue of like we're not getting exposure to new things, which just, the kind of promise of the internet was an opportunity to explore and engage with things totally new to you. And unfortunately, the result of the internet, a result of the internet is these more powerful algorithms, which then make this promise of the internet defunct, of trying to find, have agency and have freedom to try and find these things that you want. So, and the author also kind of talked about the future of like taste, I guess is what you could say, but meaning like how our aesthetics are going to be shaped, are continuing to be increasingly and in large part shaped by algorithms, and how this is going to continue defining our individuality and our cultural identity. All of which I think it's pretty hard not to agree with. But there's a lot of people online who are actually like there's a lot of really strong criticism about this. So I would say DYOR, do your own research. But chapter 5, I paid real closer attention to because it focused on content creators. Oh, shocker. I paid attention to that, right? And how chasing algorithms just dominates the field and limits the ability for creators to express true creativity. Because if you're going into content creation and making it a profession, there's a certain degree of algorithm chasing that you have to do to be successful, to pull in the views, and to actually fund yourself, whether by ads or like or chasing like the kind of content that people are willing to then support on Patreon or buy memberships to, whatever, like it's Twitch, or I guess Twitch is subscribe, right? So it made me also think about how even if the philosophy of this content that I have been making is that nobody cares and I can freely create what I want, and that I'm not specifically chasing any kind of algorithm or using data science to try and put out what I know is going to pull in views, my interests and my ideas still come to me through some level of a type of filter, but I feel like, that's just unavoidable, right? Even before we entered this like filter world, we had a non-computerized algorithm that still dominated and filtered content that, and what I mean by this is social norms. These are human algorithm filters that dictated what content we were exposed to and learned about. And so I'm wondering how much what was that sweet spot between pre-internet when it was human to human filtering and today's internet, where it's all algorithmic filtering down to the kind of picture that you see for a movie on Netflix. I wonder if there ever was like a true sweet spot in the development of the internet where we had this freedom, right? I will say that for the average person who just wanted to get the gist of this, a book seems a bit much, and you're better off maybe reading synopsis articles. I think that might be the better approach here than reading a full-on book. I also, when I was reading through this, I found myself like wanting the old internet. It's one that I hardly and barely remember, and I was truthfully too young to actually participate in, but I now have this appreciation for. Like, if you look at my personal website, I think you'll see that I've tried to model it after the old internet, where I am actively providing these suggestions. Like, these are my hand curated, filtered content creators I think you should check out, or these are the platforms or podcasts that I think are should be supported, and that's kind of what I want to say. This is maybe getting into a tangent, but I want to see more personal websites, and on these personal websites, you giving me your own personal recommendations. I'm going to say that this book also reaffirmed my frustrations with major social media platforms, and like how algorithms have access to all this data. And it also made me jealous of European privacy laws. God, those are so nice. Seriously though, if you don't know anything about European privacy laws, take a few minutes to look into it and see how much the EU like has protections in place to stop Facebook and Twitter from accessing your very personal private data on platforms that are not even Facebook or Twitter owned. And so seriously, check it out. European privacy laws are a dream come true, in my opinion. Another thing that old internet, jumping back and forth here, I know, is just like these curated lists, and they're not just like displayed as an act of consumption, but they're almost like an act of self-definition. They're I look at these lists that I'm slowly adding to my personal website, and it's like they're the culture of me. And I really like that. And I really hope that I can start to see more of that in the future. As hopefully as social media begins to die, I hope that we turn to having personal websites, in the theme of old school MySpace almost. Honestly, the last thing that I want to note on Filterworld, my favorite part of the book probably came at the end, and it's about how we consume media. The author wanted to say that there's like this resurgence of interest in the old internet, and see, my little rant was supposed to be saved for this part, but I got ahead of myself. And it's like the old internet was an internet of interconnected websites where we have a better way of learning about each other. And I wish that we had a form of a digital social networking site where if you liked a person, you could go to that person, and all there was a list of recommendations for others. And so where this network is literally just stripped down to a name, a title, and a link to their personal website, and then if you like this person, check out these, 5 people. And it's literally just a web of interconnected people that if you like one person's kind of whatever that they do, you can go see other people that'll like that. And hey, if you're listening to this and you're a developer and you want to make this happen, I would love to build it with you. I'm a web developer too. I'm sure there's a market. Hit me up. The rest of these are not going to be as long because they're novels, And it's really, really hard for me to talk about these novels without giving away major spoilers. And that's why there's so much less for me to share about each of these. But the first novel we're going to talk about, Goblin Emperor. Dear Lord, this book was so confusing and hard to follow. I was constantly having to reference names on the wiki and on other websites to try and keep the characters straight. The use of honorific titles were no help whatsoever because I never did. Honestly, if you put a list of the honorific titles in front of me and then you put like their rough real world equivalent, I would not be able to match it. Still, would not be able to understand it. And there were so many different honorifics to try and figure out. It was tough. It was really tough. And at one point I was like, I cannot be the only one struggling with this. So I looked online and I saw a lot of people were saying that their theory is that it was supposed to be confusing because the main character spends most of the book completely confused as well, overwhelmed by everything because I'm not really ruining anything. This is the beginning of the story. He was raised in seclusion in this estate way out in the countryside, doesn't know anything about court politics, doesn't really know anything about the government. His father is the emperor, and all of the other heirs in the line of succession die. And so he suddenly goes from living a life of forced seclusion because his father didn't like him, to now being the emperor. And he is just incredibly overwhelmed by the experience. And so the theory just goes that we are supposed to be just as overwhelmed as he is. And if the author meant to do that, that is a damn masterclass in it because my God. I honestly don't know if I read it a second time, if I'd be any more prepared for it. I will say there was some fantastic world building in this. If you looking at the court politics, there were issues of attempted assassination, there is actual assassination, usurping, all of these things, all of this, through that, we see a lot of court politics. We learn about how these different political systems work and the way the different systems of government are working in this fantasy kingdom. It doesn't really touch on class with any real depth. There was a very interesting, I'm trying to be picking my words carefully here. There was a very interesting section on class struggles, and maybe it's basically these people, this religious group thought that anyone could rise up and become they could seize their own means. They were almost communist style, but let me be clear that group gets put down. And that's maybe the only spoiler I want to drop. That alone, it was really, really interesting. It really helped me kind of finalize one of my religious groups in Alorum. So that was solid. The ending was a bit rushed. We finally see Maya, the main character, grow into his role as emperor, only for the story to come to an almost abrupt end. There's 4 parts, and then each part had its own chapters, right? And the 4th part was after all the climax, and he's making some great moves as emperor, and he's grown into his role, and then it's just resolved, goodbye. And I just I was bummed. And I honestly, it feels primed for a sequel that never came. And a sequel could have been so so good. Like there are so many plot points hinted at that could have been followed up in a sequel, and I'm just bummed about it. Ultimately, I can see why this was actually listed as a recommended read by the D&D 5e Dungeon Master Guide. If you look in the back of that, you'll see a very lengthy list of suggested novels and source material for creating D&D campaigns. And this was on that list. That's where I found it, and I am so glad that I'm actually checking that out. I can see plenty of interesting campaigns or adventures coming out of this book, The Goblin Emperor, like, for instance, dealing with various political fallouts of issues that we see throughout the book, or the economic and religious components that are talked about and discussed and debated and fought over in this book could easily be plucked out and given a slight twist for gameplay for adventurers having to deal with it. So, highly recommend. Book number 3, The Librarianist. I consider this book to be about the penultimate experience before death. And thinking about that word, penultimate. It just kind of rolls off the tongue. It's a great word. I don't remember the first time I heard it, maybe a couple of years ago, and now I just love it. It's just such a good word, and it sneaks in all around my life. But I have heard some people are like, I feel like the world found out about this word, and now they just can't let it go. And I am definitely part of the problem. Anyways, The Librarianist follows Bob Comet, a retired librarian who volunteers at a local senior center. Sounds like a pretty solid start. He's a strong introvert, and as he kind of begins to process his new life in this volunteer role, we end up like diving through the story of his life. And this is why I consider it the penultimate experience before his death, because we see Bob's health deteriorate. We see him reflect on his life experiences. We see him accept the next step in his life, and we know that he is not exactly long for this world. And we kind of see, and we also see this similar experience happening in some of the other side characters in the story about how it's the end of their life and this is what they're going through and the changes that they're processing and accepting and embracing even. I was really prepared for the ending to be very sad. And I could feel this building amount of dread as I was kind of pushing through the story. And I was so stressed about the ending. All I'll say is, it's an easy to follow novel, and I wish I could talk more about it, but it's really hard to do so without giving away any major spoilers. Suffice to say, it's worth a read. There are a couple twists in there that were enjoyable and really serve the purpose of the story rather than being jarring and distracting from the emotions that I think the book elicits. And so I had this book recommended through a help or a work ticket by a stakeholder on the other side of the company, and I am so glad they sent it to me because there's no way I would have ever heard about this book, and I can't remember who recommended it to me anymore. I wish I did know, because I would love to tell them thank you, but that was 5-6 months ago, and it was such a minor ticket that it would be pretty much impossible for me to dig it up and figure it out. The fourth and final book we're going to talk about, A Time to Kill by John Grisham. This is his very first novel, and it was missing what I consider the trademark twist of a John Grisham novel. But that doesn't mean I didn't absolutely love the novel as much as it was I didn't. What I'm trying to say is I loved it just as much as it was hard to actually read. It's dealing with the murder case of a black man who kills two white men who brutally raped his daughter, and it takes place in Mississippi, 1984. And it opens up with the rape, and it's just what an abrasive start, right? But it explores themes of like racism, bigotry, and ethics, and the justice system. And I honestly felt a bit squeamish reading this at times, almost maybe like uncomfortable or just like angry or just I don't. It's a lot of different emotions as you're like reading through this and processing what the characters are processing, and seeing the KKK and just it's tough. I mean, that's such an understatement, and I hate saying it's tough, but I mean, that's what it is, right? And I wish that I could use bigger, fancier words here, but I don't want to. I just want to use the kind of raw, simpleton words right here of just, it's rough. I was surprised by the ending, and it's really hard to tell. For me, it was really hard to tell what the result of the case was going to be throughout the entire trial, which is most of the book. Well, not the trial is most of the book, but all the prep for the trial and then actually getting into the trial like that. That's what the whole book is. And so, as we're going through this, I'm like, man, I really couldn't tell which way this was going to go. And I think that's, obviously you get that with John Grisham. Bless that man. I haven't watched the movie that is based on the book yet. The movie has a lot of big actors like Matthew McConaughey, Sandra Bullock, Samuel L. Jackson, Kevin Spacey, Donald Sutherland, just to name a few. But it really is just jam-packed with great authors or great actors. And I would love to. My plan is to sit down soon and try to watch it. I'm curious how much artistic liberties were taken from the book, and also what they choose not to show. I'm wondering how successfully they paint the KKK in the same light that John Grisham does. And I'm wondering what, specific scenes of violence are actually kept in this movie. And the movie looks like it's shot with this surrealism and like grittiness that I think a lot of it will be kept in. And obviously, I think they're just going to skip right over the intro. I think that might have been a little too much to put in the movie, but anyway, those are my book reports from my summer readings. I've got some follow-up to do, like reading Wild to Distant Seas still, and watching A Time to Kill movie. And I wish I could have more time to get through this. I wish I had more time to get through this list over the summer. I was so confident that I was like, 5 books this summer, please. I'm going to go camping a bunch. I'm going to be relaxing. Then I ended up with plans pretty much every single weekend, and I just like couldn't escape it, whether it was my family or Faith's family, or it was my friends or Faith's friends or whatever. There was just almost always something every single weekend, and it was next to impossible to actually get time. And it's so weird that we have had more time on the weekends to ourselves since school started than we did pretty much all summer. I don't know how that worked out, but that's how it worked out. And I'm not necessarily like, I'm not complaining. I'm complaining in the fact that I didn't have time to read, but I'm not complaining that we didn't have this wonderful summer about where we got to hang out with friends and family and make a lot of memories and just and enjoy it. But also next summer after the wedding, I'm going to be telling everyone, oh, sorry, this post-wedding thing, or Oh, sorry, I'm going to be lying to everyone, telling them I got plans with an imaginary friend so that I don't have to do anything all next summer. Only things I want to do, like really want to do. Okay, that's enough rambling. Those are my book reports. Read these, all of these. All of these were fantastic books. You could probably skip Filterworld. Read a recap article on it. But the novels, read them. Whatever one suits your fancy. And let me know what your favorite book of the summer was. I'd love to hear about what that book was and why.